Republican candidates in presidential elections rarely do well in the past 50 or 60 plus years amongst African American voters. That tends to be the pattern.
That's weird.
And Trump is actually doing far worse than usual. I wonder why. And so he wants to give the old college try at improving those numbers. And to that end, he's actually going to go not just to a city with a large African American population and then talk to a crowd of white people. In this case, he's going to go talk to Bishop Wayne T. Jackson of Faith Ministries International, a black church. And he was expected to go and talk to the congregation there, and they decided having him talk unscripted to a group of black voters is not a good idea. And so they're not going to have him do that. So instead, he's going to be interviewed by the bishop, but still talking. So they decided, okay, we're going to do that, but you're going to submit the questions in advance, which, by the way, is not that weird for politicians. A lot of the time when they go on Rachel Maddow or whatever, they'll get the questions in advance.
Correct.
That's not too weird. However, in this case, they've also then taken those questions and scripted out Trump's responses. So we're going to go over a couple of those. And remember, this is a church, so there's going to get into some spiritual matters and, of course, also some issues of concern to African Americans. So an 8-page draft script was obtained by the New York Times. There are 12 questions that Bishop Wayne T. Jackson, the pastor, intends to ask him. Also, it's a taped question and answer session, which means that before anyone sees it, they're going to take this prepared questions and scripted answers and then edit them down and then release it. So this is authenticity.
Wow.
So the first question, are you a Christian and do you believe the Bible is an inspired work of God? They told Trump to say, as I went through my life, things got busy with business, but my family kept me grounded to the truth and the word of God.
Wow.
I treasure my relationship with my family, and through them, I have found a strong faith enriched by an ever wonderful God. And with my second family, I found a better God. And the best God of all was my third family. So, look, obviously they're obscuring a lot of his personal history there. It's a good answer for a religious audience. What do you think?
I think if they believe the Bible, I bet they'll be able to believe that bullshit.
I think that they might.
I mean, they don't really have their critical eye.
Not necessarily?
It's not really shined up real or cleaned up. No, they accept a lot of BS.
Arguments that aren't internally consistent,
right.
It's okay a lot of the time. These are good people, but
they're very practiced at cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Yes.
Good. I like that. Trump, so another question. Trump was told to avoid repeating the word racist in response to a question. That's a good call. I actually agree with him here.
Was that the only word they told him not to say? Because I bet there's another one.
That's probably true. Oh, God. So there was a question, is your campaign racist? They told him not to say the word racist. They told him to say the proof, as they say, will be in the pudding. Which, by the way, this is just a small aside, that is not the expression. People need to stop saying that. It's the proof of the pudding is in the tasting. The proof, that's not the expression. But anyway, so he's told not to say racist. You know, don't say I'm a crook, that sort of thing. You don't want to have the word racist coming out of your mouth.
That's right.
It's probably a good call. Another question. When asked about his vision for black Americans, the script suggests that Mr. Trump stay positive, advising that he use lines such as, if we are to make America great again, we must reduce rather than highlight issues of race in this country. And I want to make race disappear as a factor in government and governance.
What a goddamn clown show. This is such a goddamn clown show. I mean, really, it's like watching a 6-year-old fucking try to do so. It's just funny. It's just ridiculous. It's barely worth talking about. But just because it's so bizarre, it's just bizarre now. What's really worth talking about is that we actually have to take this guy seriously because what the Democrats and corporate America did is by putting Hillary Clinton on the ballot. What an unforced error for America.
Means that he could possibly win, so we're forced to pay attention.
So we decided to go against a clown like this with the most unpopular politician in the history of the fucking world. That's what we decided to go against.
I will correct one thing. We didn't do that.
No, we didn't do that.
It was done.
But geniuses like everybody at MSNBC, right? Yeah. Everybody at CNN, everybody in the mainstream news media, basically, and half the Democratic Party said, oh, no, remember that woman who was too corrupt and voted for the Iraq War that we didn't want 8 years ago? No, I bet she's way better, even though she's doing way more horrible shit. Yeah.
And look, one of the other reasons that this is so troubling is that, I mean, this is a community who has been largely ignored by both political parties for decades and decades and decades. And to the very limited extent that the Republicans had tried to do anything to appeal to African Americans around the country, they're giving up on that. I'm gonna get rid of race as a factor in governance. No, that's the problem. The ignoring of the community and casting aside their concerns and saying that they're making up all this stuff about police brutality, their concerns about the economy being rigged against them, the education system being rigged against them. Don't worry. You're talking about race. Stop talking about race. How is that going to help these millions and millions and millions of people? But that's a strategy that not he came up with, that his staff, his paid scriptwriting staff came up with. But he does have a fallback. He's also going to remind undecided black voters that his single-digit support among them is now up to 8% and climbing. So that's good.
I tell you what, honest to God, Johnny, every time I hear a story about Donald Trump and how crazy and incompetent, by the way, so that's why I don't also fear him as our president. Because when he becomes president, you think he's all of a sudden going to get competent and be able to institute the crazy stuff he's threatening to do? The reason why you're all afraid and you're going to vote for Hillary Clinton is because Donald Trump, he can't do a goddamn thing. He can't get anything done. The guy's a massive incompetent. That's what we talk about here all the time, right? How incompetent he is.
Yes.
But you're still afraid of him? I'm not afraid of him. You know what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid of people that Henry Kissinger are okay with. I'm afraid of someone who John Negroponte is okay with. I'm afraid of someone who George W. Bush calls his cousin. That's who I'm afraid of, not an incompetent piece of shit like Donald Trump.
Yeah, but here's the problem. I'm not afraid that Donald Trump will accomplish everything he's saying.
He won't accomplish anything.
I'm afraid that he will attempt to. Whether he actually can deport 12 million people and break up dozens of millions of families is irrelevant if he tries to and deports 1 million or 2 million. That will be one of the worst things that will ever happen in American history.
Not true.
Regardless, breaking up tens of millions of families.
What do you think's happening right now? If you believe Fusion's reporting, which I do, Barack Obama has deported more Hispanics than all the presidents combined since 1890.
I agree.
So they said at the end of their report, Fusion said that Barack Obama is currently doing what Donald Trump only promises to do. And by the way,
That's stretching the definition
you saw
a ton.
him go to Mexico this week and knuckle under like a pussy that he is. Yet you're still afraid of him.
Yeah, but then he came back and said that he's still going to build the wall and they're still going to pay for it. I don't think that he can make them pay for it, but this is how he's going to run our foreign policy. The fact that his approach to the Mexican government, his approach to the Russian government, how happy and familiar he is with Vladimir Putin, this should be scary.
What should be scary is that Hillary Rodham Clinton has called for a no-fly zone in Syria, which means she wants war with Russia,
I don't support a no-fly zone there.
Which means she's already destabilized the Middle East and set the table for World War III. And you're still worried about somebody else.
Yes.
Fucking crazy.
Yes, I can be against the no-fly zone in Syria and still be against a guy who says that the official policy of our military will be to kill the families of people we suspect are terrorists.
Okay, I'm just telling you.
That is still a problem.
She was full-throated support of an illegal, immoral war crimes.
Donald Trump supported the Iraq War too.
I know.
It's a shitty situation when both of the candidates supported one of the worst foreign policy decisions of American history.
I just can't sit here and pretend like Donald Trump is as scary as everybody else thinks he is. And I'm not going to vote out of fear, and I'm not going to let the Clinton campaign, everybody.
No, I'm asking you to vote out of far closer on. I think that you are far closer on any number of issues to Hillary Clinton than you are to Donald Trump.
Oh,
that has no emotion in it.
Crazy.
That's simply a recognition.
That is crazy.
It's not crazy. If we had the time, we could go down through literally dozens of issues. Now, you'd say you don't trust her, and that's perfectly fine. You don't have to trust her on any number of issues. But it's simply the case that you and other progressives are far closer to her than Donald Trump.
Hey, you know...
and also, look, I know that you're not scared of him, and I don't want you to be scared of him, but you were also for months talking about how he will be the rise of American fascism, how he could be the end of American democracy.
I've changed my mind.
And you're free to do that.
Because of the great reporting the Young Turks have done, and especially in this Loser Donald segment that you guys do, I've realized this guy's a fucking incompetent nincompoop. And no one should be afraid of this guy. And the only reason anybody's afraid of him is because we decided to stick our heads up our fucking asses and nominate the most hated politician in the history of the goddamn country, who is corrupt. Well, it's not a debate.
He is still far more hated than her. They're both extremely unpopular.
He's not a politician. He's a game show host.
Well, he's a politician now because he has like a 30 to 40% chance of winning the presidency. So I understand the lack of fear. But to the families right now that watched his speech in Arizona and are worried about their family members being ripped away from them and sent below the south of the border.
Happening now. Happening right now.
I understand that.
Happening right now.
Look, and we've criticized Obama any number of times for his deportation policy, but obviously, and I mean, there's no debate here, Donald Trump is talking about ramping it up almost exponentially. He's talking about trying to track down, conservatively, 11 million people. He says 30 million, which nobody believes is actually the correct number. And he says that he will try to deport all those people. He'll deport millions in the first hour of his administration. Now, whether he can actually do that or not, what do you think on day one he will do? Not try?
I've been told that people like me are supporting, won't vote for Hillary Clinton because of white privilege and that I'm not Hispanic, I'm not Muslim, I'm not poor, all that stuff. Well, you know that the majority of Jill Stein's voters, people supporting her, are non-college educated. Did you know that? Did you know that the majority of women in America aren't going to vote for Hillary Clinton? Did you know that?
No, I didn't see that.
That's a fact.
But I also, that's an interesting fact that's worthy of coverage, but I don't understand how it changes the calculus between those two candidates.
These are super interesting facts, though.
They are interesting facts. I love those sorts of numbers. That's why the first story today was breaking down polling data on police brutality.
I'm saying that the people who are most affected by neoliberalism are the people who are rejecting it. I'm saying that I was at a Jill Stein event the other night, and there were a lot of Bernie delegates there that were poor Hispanics. And they told me that they can't support this, that it's got to stop, we have to break. And I'm with them. And so, you know, it's not me. I looked at the facts, right? So she has lots of minorities supporting her. She's almost, anyway, she has a bigger percentage of people of color supporting her than are in the population. So Jill Stein, that's just a lie. When people say that it's white privilege and people who won't vote for Hillary.
I didn't mention.
I know. I'm not saying you did.
No,
I'm not saying you. No. I just wanted to get that out there. So and using that using that fair to get me to vote for Hillary Clinton. Not that you're doing that. Actually hurts those people. It actually hurts the people who are most vulnerable to neoliberal policies. The people who are non-college educated, the workers in America. That's who it hurts the most. Okay.
Okay. Those are perfectly fine points.
Thank you.
I don't disagree.
Thank you. And you know, and I respect your opinion, Johnny, and I respect your comedy enough that I put a video up on my channel of your comedy.
That's actually my favorite video that's been on your channel.